He boarded the plane with a baby that wouldn't stop crying. His eyes were tired. His hands were shaking. And the empty seat beside him? It was about to be filled by a woman whose own heart had shattered years ago. Neither of them knew it yet. But this flight would change everything. If you believe in second chances, in love that heals, and in the quiet power of kindness, you're in the right place. Take a moment to subscribe, so you won't miss any of the stories that remind us. Even in our darkest hour, light can find its way back in. Now, let's begin. Jonas Hale had never flown before. He had never wanted to. He was a man of the ground, wrenches, steel, engines that sputtered and sparked beneath his hands. But now, he was up in the sky, 30,000 feet above everything that used to feel solid. And he was terrified. Not of the flight itself, but of the fact that his 4-month-old daughter, Maddie, wouldn't stop crying. She had been howling since the moment they passed through security, her tiny lungs no match for the sterile hush of the airport gate. Now, buckled against his chest in a baby carrier, her wails echoed through the narrow cabin like a fire alarm nobody could shut off. Jonas tightened his grip on the bottle of formula in one hand, bouncing his knee in vain. "Shh, sweetie," he whispered, his voice ragged. "We're almost there." He wasn't even sure where "there" was. Oregon? A place called Silverwood? Some little dot on the map where a community center had offered temporary housing for single fathers like him. All he knew was that he had nothing left to lose. Not since Olivia passed. A woman 2 rows ahead turned to glare. A man across the aisle let out a heavy sigh. Jonas felt their judgment like needles under his skin. He tried not to meet anyone's eyes. He knew what they saw, a mechanic in a faded flannel, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks, a baby he couldn't control, a mess. He was a mess. Then, without a word, the woman beside him reached over. Jonas flinched, instinctively protective, but the woman, older than him by maybe 5 years, only offered a smile and gently extended her arms. "May I?" she asked softly, nodding toward Maddie. He hesitated. She wore a long navy scarf wrapped loosely around her head and shoulders. Her eyes were striking, gray with hints of stormy blue, lined with quiet sorrow. Her voice was calm, melodic in a way that reminded him of rain. I don't think she'll stop," Jonas muttered. "I don't mind trying." There was something in her tone, firm but kind, and Jonas was too tired to refuse. With a shaky breath, he unfastened the carrier straps and passed Maddie into her arms. The woman took the child with practiced ease. Not hesitant, not awkward. She cradled Maddie against her shoulder and began to hum, low, slow, and strangely familiar. A lullaby, not one Jonas knew, but something ancient, almost sacred. Within minutes, Maddie's cries softened into sniffles, then silence, then, miraculously, sleep. Jonas stared. She never does that for anyone," he said, his voice hoarse. "Not even me." The woman didn't answer right away. She just rocked the baby gently, her gaze on the clouds outside. "My name's Celeste," she said at last. "Celeste Marin." "Jonas," he replied. "Jonas Hale, and that's Maddie." Celeste smiled faintly. "She's beautiful." He nodded, then looked away. His throat tightened. They sat in silence for several moments, the hum of the engines the only sound between them. Jonas didn't know what to say. Small talk felt insulting, and pouring out his grief to a stranger felt dangerous. But the way she held Maddie, the way her fingers lingered at the edge of the blanket as if memorizing its softness, told him this woman carried her own shadows. "You're good with babies," he said finally. "I had one," Celeste replied, barely above a whisper. "Once." Jonas looked at her, but her expression didn't invite questions. It invited respect. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. Celeste nodded, her eyes still on Maddie. "Don't be. He taught me how to love harder, even after he was gone." Jonas swallowed hard. The ache in his chest bloomed in all directions. "First time flying?" she asked gently, trying to shift the weight in the air. "Yeah." He gave a nervous chuckle. "Can you tell?" "A little," she teased. "You've been gripping the armrest like it owes you money." He let out a real laugh, the first in weeks. "It might." Celeste smiled, but there was something careful about the way she moved, as though her own heart were stitched back together, thread by thread. Jonas glanced at her scarf, wondering what it was hiding, not just physically, but emotionally. Grief, like his, loneliness, a kind of elegant pain that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing their descent. Jonas's stomach flipped. Celeste turned to him. "Where are you headed?" "Phoenix House, in Silverwood," he said. "Some nonprofit for single dads. I'm trying to start over." To his surprise, Celeste's eyes warmed. "I know the place," she said. "It's special." "You've been there?" "In a way." She handed Maddie back to him, carefully. "And I think you're exactly the kind of man it was built for." Jonas frowned. "What do you mean?" Celeste didn't answer directly. She pulled a small card from her purse and placed it gently in his palm. "Just go. Keep your heart open." Before he could respond, the plane jolted slightly as it touched the ground. Maddie stirred, but didn't cry. Jonas held her closer, trying to make sense of what had just happened. By the time they exited the gate, Celeste had disappeared into the crowd. But the card remained in his hand, the Phoenix House, for fathers who refuse to give up. Hope grows where someone dares to plant it. C.M. Jonas stared at the initials for a long time, his thumb tracing the elegant script. C.M. Celeste Marin. He didn't know who she was, but something told him. He hadn't seen the last of her. The drive from the airport to Silverwood was quiet, except for the soft gurgling sounds Maddie made in her sleep. Jonas kept glancing at the rearview mirror of the rideshare van, half expecting her to burst into tears again. But she didn't. She lay bundled in her carrier, cheeks pink from the cold, the corners of her tiny mouth curled in a dreamlike smirk. Jonas had no idea what she was dreaming about. He hoped it was something warm, something better than anything he could offer her right now. He held the card tightly in his hand, the one Celeste had given him. The paper was thick, the lettering embossed in gold, not something a stranger usually handed out on a plane, not something a woman like her carried by accident. The Phoenix House, for fathers who refuse to give up. The address was scrawled neatly on the back. Jonas had stared at it for 10 minutes before calling the rideshare. Part of him still thought this might be a mistake, but when the van pulled off the highway and began weaving through a narrow road lined with pine trees, something shifted in him. It didn't look like a place for broken men. It looked like the kind of place you'd come to heal. The entrance to the Phoenix House was nothing like Jonas expected. There was no neon sign, no sterile clinic vibe. Instead, there was a large wooden archway with ivy creeping along its frame, and a hand-carved sign that read, "Here. No one starts over alone." The van rolled to a stop in front of a 2-story lodge built from timber and stone. The wraparound porch held rocking chairs, a pair of worn boots by the front door, and a welcome mat that looked like it had been there for generations. Smoke curled from a chimney. Wind chimes danced gently in the winter breeze. Jonas stepped out slowly, hoisting Maddie's carrier with both hands. His boots crunched against the gravel. He was halfway to the porch when the door swung open, A man in his 60s stood there, tall and lean, with a full head of silver hair and a kind smile that reached his eyes. "You must be Jonas Hale," he said. "I'm Glenn. Welcome." Jonas blinked. "I? How did you—" "Celeste called ahead," Glenn replied simply. "She doesn't usually do that." That made Jonas stop. "She works here?" Glenn chuckled softly. In a manner of speaking, he motioned for Jonas to come inside. The warmth hit him like a wave. Crackling firewood, the scent of cinnamon, old cedar floors polished by years of footsteps. It felt like walking into a memory he didn't know he'd lost. Glenn led him into a cozy sitting room with overstuffed chairs and a bookshelf that stretched to the ceiling. There was a bassinet already waiting near the fireplace. "Looks like someone was expecting you," Glenn said with a wink. Jonas lowered Maddie into it gently. She stirred, but didn't cry. "I have to admit," Jonas said, running a hand through his hair, "I don't really understand what this place is, or why she helped me." Glenn sat across from him, folding his hands calmly. "The Phoenix House is a refuge for fathers who didn't plan to raise their children alone. We offer support, housing, training, counseling, even jobs if you're willing to learn something new." Jonas looked at him skeptically. "That sounds expensive." "It's not," Glenn said. "We're fully funded. And no, you don't have to pay it back. You only have to show up for your life." Jonas exhaled, slumping slightly into the chair. "I'm not sure I've done a great job of that so far." "You're here," Glenn said gently. "That's more than most." There was a long pause. "She said she had a son," Jonas murmured, almost to himself. "Celeste." Glenn's face softened. "She did. His name was Theo. He was 10. Jonas nodded, his chest tightening. "What happened?" he asked, the words fragile, unsure if he had the right. Glenn didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "They were hit by a drunk driver. Celeste survived. He didn't." The fire crackled behind them. Jonas swallowed hard. "She lost more than a child," Glenn continued quietly. "She lost herself for a while. She stopped speaking to most people. She moved to a cabin up the mountain. Didn't come down for 2 years. But when she did, she started this." He nodded toward the house around them. Jonas looked around again, this time with new eyes. The worn wood, the hand-knit blankets, the shelf filled with parenting books and grief memoirs. This wasn't just a place. It was a second chance, built from ashes. "Why me?" he asked. "Why would she help me?" Glenn gave him a knowing smile. "Because she recognized the look in your eyes." Jonas said nothing, but deep down, he knew Glenn was right. He hadn't looked into a mirror in weeks, but he could imagine what he'd seen. Someone lost, someone running, someone desperate to believe they weren't beyond saving. Glenn stood and placed a hand on his shoulder. "There's a room upstairs, 3rd door on the right. Clean linens, crib, diapers, the works. Take tonight, rest. Tomorrow we begin." "Begin what?" Jonas asked. "Whatever comes next," Glenn replied. Jonas climbed the stairs slowly, Maddie in one arm, a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The door creaked open into a room flooded with soft light. The crib was hand-painted with tiny sunflowers. A rocking chair stood near the window. On the nightstand sat a small note. "Every ending is just a place where something better can begin. C.M." Jonas touched the paper like it might vanish. He sat down in the chair. Maddie nestled in his arms, her breath warm against his chest. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Inside, for the first time in what felt like forever, Jonas closed his eyes and didn't feel afraid of tomorrow. Jonas hadn't expected sleep to come easy, but it had, like a tide finally allowed to rest. Maddie had stirred only once during the night, and even then it felt more like a dream, her tiny fingers curling around his thumb, reminding him she was still here, still his. When he opened his eyes the next morning, the room was awash with a soft golden light. Snow blanketed the windowsill. The world outside looked quieter than he remembered it ever being. Downstairs, a kettle whistled. Jonas rubbed his eyes, stretched, and patted softly across the creaking floorboards. Maddie was still asleep in her crib, cheeks flushed with warmth and the kind of peace babies seem to summon from places adults had long forgotten. He changed into a fresh shirt, one Glenn had laid out for him, folded like a gift, and made his way downstairs. The kitchen was alive with the scent of coffee, cinnamon, and something sweet baking in the oven. Glenn stood at the stove, humming a hymn that Jonas couldn't quite place. "Morning," Jonas said, voice rough with sleep. Glenn turned with a grin. "You survived your first night. That deserves a muffin." Jonas chuckled. "I think I owe that more to Maddie." "She's a good baby. You're doing better than you think." Jonas poured himself a cup of coffee and took a seat at the small kitchen table. The chair was carved from oak, worn at the edges, as if it had been the witness of many mornings like this. Quiet beginnings after long storms. "You said yesterday this place offers work?" Jonas asked. Glenn nodded, plating a warm blueberry muffin and sliding it across the table. "That's right, nothing fancy. Maintenance, gardening, carpentry, helping other residents. We believe in hands busy with purpose." Jonas took a bite and closed his eyes. It wasn't just good. It tasted like home. "I'll do whatever you need," he said. "I know," Glenn replied. "But today, I want you to meet someone." Jonas looked up. "She's in the garden," Glenn added. "You'll find her near the sunflower bed." Jonas frowned. "Celeste?" Glenn smiled faintly but didn't confirm. "The garden will explain more than I ever could." It was colder than he expected. He wrapped Maddie snugly against his chest and stepped onto the path behind the lodge, which wound gently down into a small walled garden nestled among tall pines. There was something sacred about the space. No signs, no rules posted. Just soft wooden benches, flower beds asleep under the frost, and stone paths curved like old rivers. Wind whispered through the dry stalks of last season's blooms, and there she was, Celeste, kneeling beside a bed of frozen sunflowers, her scarf loose around her shoulders, fingers brushing gently over the snow-covered stems. Jonas approached quietly. For a moment, he didn't speak. There was something private in the way she moved, like she was speaking a language only the garden understood. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said finally. "You didn't," she replied without looking up. "I was waiting." Jonas sat on the bench nearby, shifting Maddie in her carrier. "You come here often?" Celeste smiled softly. "Every day, even in winter." "Why?" She rose slowly, dusting her gloves, then sat beside him. "Because this is where things keep growing, even when they're not supposed to." Jonas didn't know what to say. The words felt bigger than the moment, heavy with meaning he hadn't yet earned. "I didn't thank you," he said after a pause. "For yesterday, for Maddie." Celeste turned to him, her eyes soft. "You don't owe me anything." "I don't get it," Jonas said quietly. "You don't know me. Why help?" She looked away toward the pines in the distance. "There was a man once," she said, "sitting on a hospital floor, holding his son's hand for the last time. No one sat beside him. No one even saw him. I walked past him 3 times. I was late for a board meeting. I thought someone else would help." Jonas watched her silent. When my son died, she continued, I realized I'd become the kind of person I used to despise, the kind who looked away. So now, when I see someone falling, I stop. Jonas felt something break open in his chest. It wasn't grief, it was recognition. You built this place, he said. Celeste nodded. The Phoenix House, he murmured. Is it named after your son? It's named after what I hoped I could become. They sat for a while without speaking, just the wind, the stillness, and the distant sound of chimes near the lodge. I feel like I'm failing every second, Jonas confessed, like I'm always one wrong move away from wrecking everything. Celeste looked at him gently. That's how I felt the year after Theo died. Every breath hurt, every sunrise felt cruel. But healing doesn't come all at once, Jonas. It's stitched into you slowly, by small kindnesses like this bench, this garden, or a baby's hand wrapped around your finger. He looked down at Maddie. Her eyes were open now, calm and curious. I want to be better, he said. Not just for her, for me. You already are, Celeste whispered. Jonas blinked back a sudden sting in his eyes. Then, without thinking, he said, Why sunflowers? She smiled, distant. Theo loved them, said they were always looking for the light. Jonas nodded, absorbing the weight of that. I'll help you tend them, he said. Celeste looked at him. Really looked, and for the first time her smile wasn't tinged with sorrow. I'd like that, she said. The snow kept falling through the rest of the week, as if the sky had forgotten how to stop grieving. Yet, inside the Phoenix House, warmth held its ground. Flickering fires, quiet conversations, the gentle cadence of life returning in small, deliberate steps. Jonas found himself waking earlier each morning. Not because Maddie cried, she had become surprisingly calm, but because something in him was shifting, slowly, subtly, as though his body was learning how to carry itself without bracing for collapse. Each day began the same. A warm cup of coffee, a diaper change, a visit to the sunflowers still asleep beneath their winter blanket, and Celeste. Always Celeste. Sometimes she was already there, seated on the bench, sketchbook in her lap. Other times she arrived just after him, her boots leaving perfect imprints in the snow. They spoke less now, but the silence was full, charged with a comfort Jonas hadn't felt with anyone in years. It was on the 5th morning that he heard her hum again. He had been rocking Maddie slowly, his gloved hand cupping the back of her head, when the melody began drifting through the stillness, soft, slow, and unmistakable. The same song Celeste had hummed on the plane. He looked up. You sang that to Theo? He asked gently. Celeste hesitated. Her breath came out in a puff of white. It was his favorite, she said. I used to sing it when he had nightmares, or when he couldn't sleep, or just because. Jonas nodded. Maddie likes it too. Celeste turned toward him, the corner of her mouth lifting just slightly. It's an old Welsh lullaby, she said. My grandmother taught it to me. She said it was a prayer hidden in melody. Jonas closed his eyes, letting the tune settle into the space between them. There was something sacred in it, like a promise murmured through time. Too quiet to disturb the air, but too real to ignore. Do you ever sing it out loud? He asked. Celeste's smile faded. Her fingers tightened around her scarf. Not since the hospital, she said. The last time I sang it, Theo was hooked to more machines than a child should ever see. I thought, if I sang it perfectly, maybe he'd stay. Jonas didn't speak. His throat was too tight. And when he didn't, she continued, the song stopped meaning comfort. It meant failure. There it was, that raw, unfiltered truth she rarely allowed to surface. Jonas didn't push it away. He sat in it with her. Let the silence grow heavy. Let it breathe. "I know that feeling," he said quietly. "When Olivia was dying, I held her hand and said everything I could think of, every 'I'm sorry', every 'I love you', every story I could remember. I thought words could build a bridge and bring her back, but they didn't." He looked down at Maddie, whose little hand had curled around the collar of his jacket. "So now," he added, "sometimes I just go silent. Like if I don't speak, I won't say the wrong thing again." Celeste's eyes shimmered. Not with tears, but with something older, recognition, maybe, or grace. "You're not the only one carrying silence," she said. "But maybe we don't have to do it alone." Jonas met her gaze, and for a moment the cold vanished. Later that afternoon, Glenn invited Jonas into the main hall for his first volunteer shift, helping to repair a broken railing near the back porch. The work was simple, honest, the kind that allowed his hands to remember their strength, even while his heart remembered its ache. Ellie, the house nurse, passed by with a basket of winter linens. "She's smiling more," she said, nodding toward the window where Celeste stood, watching the snow fall beside Maddie's crib. Jonas followed her gaze. "She lost a lot." Ellie tilted her head. "So did you." "Yeah, but she built all this. I'm just a guy trying to keep diapers dry." Ellie laughed gently. "Jonas, healing isn't only in building foundations. Sometimes it's in being willing to stand on one." He didn't know how to respond to that, but the words stayed with him. That evening, as the house quieted and the wind hummed against the walls like an old lullaby itself, Jonas climbed the stairs with Maddie tucked under one arm and a strange sense of anticipation in his chest. He paused outside the nursery door. And there she was. Celeste sat in the rocker, arms gently swaying, Maddie fast asleep against her chest. The light from the lamp behind her turned her scarf into a crown of amber and gold. Jonas stood still, watching. She looked up. "I hope you don't mind," she said softly. She was fussy. "I thought the old tune might help." "You sang it?" he asked, stepping inside. Celeste nodded slowly. "I think I needed to remember how it sounded when it wasn't just mine." He swallowed, moved beyond words. "I'm glad it's hers now," she added. Jonas knelt beside the rocker, brushing Maddie's blanket. "I think she's trying to remind us. The world's not done with us yet." Celeste smiled, this time fully, freely. "No," she said. "I don't think it is." The snow let up by midweek, replaced by the low sun casting golden beams across the pine-covered hills. The silence in Silverwood was unlike anything Jonas had known before. It wasn't empty, it was rich, full of possibility, full of pause. Every morning, he still visited the garden, but something had shifted. He no longer walked there to escape his grief. He walked there to sit with it, alongside Celeste, whose own shadows no longer frightened him. They didn't need to speak much anymore. Some days, their silence held more meaning than conversation ever could. One afternoon, while Maddie napped and Celeste was out meeting with one of the other families, Glenn approached Jonas with a bundle of tools. "I've got a job for you," he said, handing him a ring of old brass keys. "There's a storage room on the west wing of the house. Hasn't been touched in a while. Thought you might help me fix the latch and clear it out." Jonas accepted the keys without question. Work steadied him. It gave his mind space to breathe without drowning. The hallway Glenn directed him to was quieter than the rest of the lodge. The kind of quiet where footsteps sound louder and you start whispering even when you're alone. He found the door at the end of the corridor, a wide oak frame, its paint slightly chipped. The plaque beside it had been removed. All that remained were two small holes and a faint shadow where a name once was. The key turned with effort. The door creaked open. Jonas stepped into a room lit only by a narrow window high on the wall. Dust hung in the air like memories unsettled. But it wasn't a storage room. It was a memorial. Photographs lined one wall. Black and white, color, Polaroids curling at the edges. There were handprints in paint, pressed onto canvas, crayon drawings of sunflowers, and in the center of it all, a child's jacket, carefully pinned in a glass case. Jonas stepped closer. A name was stitched inside the collar in bright blue thread. Theo. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. The rest of the room was soft and simple. A rocking chair, a bookshelf of children's stories, all gently worn, and in the corner a blanket folded over a tiny iron bed frame. It smelled faintly of cedar and lavender, like comfort long after loss. Jonas stood still, unsure whether he was intruding or being invited. He didn't touch anything. He just sat in the rocker, the creak of the wood beneath him sounding louder than it should. He looked at Theo's drawings, stick figures holding hands under a giant sun, a house with a chimney puffing hearts instead of smoke, a tree with one name carved into the bark, Mom. Jonas breathed deeply, the weight of Celeste's sorrow suddenly clearer than it had ever been. Her poise, her grace. It wasn't born of strength. It was forged from heartbreak. He pulled his phone from his pocket and opened the folder where he kept pictures of Olivia. He hadn't looked in weeks, months maybe. There she was, blurry and radiant, holding Maddie at the hospital, her eyes wet but smiling. He whispered, "I wish you could see us now." Behind him, a soft voice broke the stillness. "I wasn't sure anyone would come in here again." Jonas turned. Celeste stood in the doorway, scarf draped over one shoulder, her hands clutching the edges of her cardigan. "I'm sorry," he said, standing quickly. "Glenn sent me. I didn't know." She shook her head. "It's all right. I used to sit in that rocker every day." Jonas stepped aside as she entered. She walked slowly, deliberately, her fingers brushing the glass case. "I built this room when we opened," she said. "Not for the public, not for donors, for him, for me." Jonas remained quiet. "I wanted one place where he wouldn't be forgotten, where he was still a boy, not a statistic." Jonas nodded, his voice low. "You gave him more than most ever get." Celeste looked up, her eyes glinting. "I gave him my heart. That's what broke me." They stood in silence again. Then Jonas, voice trembling, asked, "How did you learn to breathe again?" She turned to him, the light catching the silver strands in her hair. "I didn't," she whispered. "I just kept waking up, and over time I realized that waking up was a kind of breath." He stepped closer. "You made this place into something alive. I needed to believe I still could," she said, "after everything." Jonas looked around once more. The walls were not just decorated. They were held together by love, raw, unpolished, indelible. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "I'm glad I came in," he said. "I'm glad you stayed." And for the first time, in the room where pain was preserved like sacred ground, they stood together not as two people shattered, but as two souls beginning to rebuild. The wind picked up the next morning, tugging at the edges of the house like a child wanting attention. Tree branches swayed and tapped softly against the windows of the Phoenix house. Inside, the fire was burning low, and the hush of the early hour stretched gently across the wood floors like a familiar quilt. Jonas stood in the kitchen, bottle warming in one hand, Maddie nestled against his chest in her sling. Her fingers played absently with the strings of his hoodie, half asleep, fully content. He was learning how to read her now, when her cries meant hunger, when they meant fear, when they meant, "I just want to be held." There was no instruction manual for this, no step-by-step for being a widowed father in his 30s. But some things weren't meant to be taught. They were meant to be felt. Celeste entered the kitchen without a word, wrapped in her navy scarf, cheeks still flushed from the cold. She carried 2 mugs of coffee and placed one beside him without asking. "Morning," she said, voice gentle but steady. "Morning," Jonas echoed. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep." He nodded, sensing something in her tone, something soft and unsettled. She reached out, brushing a wisp of hair from Maddie's forehead. The baby sighed contentedly. "She trusts you," Celeste said. Jonas looked down. "She doesn't have much of a choice." Celeste shook her head. "That's not how trust works. She knows your heartbeat, that's more than enough." Jonas leaned back against the counter, watching the steam rise from his mug. "You ever feel like maybe you don't deserve this kind of peace?" She turned her eyes to him. "All the time." They fell into silence, warm and unhurried. After breakfast, Glenn asked Jonas to help him organize supplies in the community hall. It wasn't hard labor, but it gave him something grounding, lifting, stacking, sorting. It felt good to sweat again, even just a little, to feel useful. "Celeste mentioned your work ethic," Glenn said casually, scribbling notes in a worn leather notebook. Jonas glanced up. "She talks about me?" Glenn smiled, just enough to make it worse. "Only when she's not avoiding the subject." Jonas laughed, though it came with a flush of confusion. "I never know what she's thinking." "That's probably because she doesn't want you to," Glenn said. "Yet." Jonas paused, then asked carefully, "Did she ever try again, after Theo?" Glenn's expression grew still. "Romantically?" Jonas nodded. "No," Glenn said. "You'd be the first she's let close in a very long time, and if you push, she'll run." Jonas leaned against the stack of boxes. "I'm not trying to push, I care, and I'm scared of messing that up." "That's what makes you different," Glenn replied. "You respect the scars." That afternoon, the snow came back, not heavy, but persistent, like a memory that wouldn't quite let go. Jonas found Celeste in the greenhouse behind the house. She was pruning a row of stubborn winter roses, her gloves dusted with soil. "Didn't peg you for a gardener," he said from the doorway. Celeste looked up, a soft grin on her lips. "I'm not. I'm a woman with too many ghosts and too much time." He stepped inside, the warm humidity hitting him like summer in the middle of winter. "You make things grow," he said. "That counts." She clipped a brown stem, then set the shears down. "You want to help?" He nodded. "Show me how." She handed him a small trowel and moved beside him to the opposite row. As she demonstrated, their hands brushed, just for a second, but the touch lingered longer in his chest than on his skin. Jonas looked over, suddenly aware of the distance between them and how much smaller it had become. Celeste noticed too. Her breath caught just barely. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping back slightly. You don't have to apologize," he said quickly. Her eyes flicked to his, searching. "It's not you I'm afraid of." "I know," he said, "but maybe I'm not afraid of the same things anymore." They stood in silence, a warmth blooming between them more real than the heat from the lamps above. "Jonas," she said softly, "I don't know how to do this. I built this place to keep people out, not let them in." He nodded. "And I've spent the last year learning how to live without expecting anything good again." Celeste closed her eyes. "So what do we do?" He stepped closer, but not too close, just enough. "We don't rush, we don't fix, we just stay, that's all I want." She opened her eyes. "Stay?" Jonas offered a smile, small, honest. if you'll have me." Celeste reached for his hand this time. No flinch, no retreat. "I will," she said, "but I can't promise I won't hide some days. Then I'll wait outside the door," Jonas said. And for the first time since she lost everything, Celeste felt something crack. Not in pain, but in permission. Permission to hope again. The Phoenix house had never looked more alive. Strings of soft white lights curled around the banisters and porch railings. Pine garlands framed every window. Inside, the scent of cinnamon, cloves, and fresh-baked bread lingered in the air like a blessing. Laughter echoed through the halls, deep, full, and free. It was Christmas Eve, and for the first time in years Jonas didn't dread the date. He stood near the fireplace in the great room. Maddie nestled in his arms, wide-eyed at the twinkling lights on the tree. She reached for a red glass ornament, her tiny fingers brushing against its surface like she was touching magic. Jonas smiled. "Easy, sweetheart. That one's older than both of us." Across the room, Glenn was directing a small choir of children, sons and daughters of the fathers who now called the Phoenix house home. A few missed notes here and there only made it more beautiful. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. Celeste sat quietly on the window seat, a warm mug in her hands, scarf loosely draped around her shoulders. She watched the room with a kind of reverent stillness, her eyes catching every small joy. Jonas watched her more than the tree. She had been quieter these past few days, calm but distant, like she was holding her breath in a way only she could understand. He hadn't asked. He had learned that some silences needed space. But tonight, something about the way her fingers clutched that mug told him the silence might be heavier than usual. As the choir finished their rendition of Silent Night, Glenn stepped forward with a small microphone. "I know this place was built from sorrow," he said, his voice calm and full. "But every brick here is also made of second chances, and tonight we celebrate them." Applause filled the room. Then Glenn gestured toward Jonas. "Before we close, one of our own fathers, Jonas, has asked to share something, a lullaby, one he says has carried his daughter to sleep, and maybe, in time, helped carry him too." Jonas froze. He hadn't expected Glenn to introduce it like that. He had planned to sing the tune softly, as part of the background, not as a performance. But then he looked down at Maddie. She was staring up at him, thumb in her mouth, her world wrapped in the steady beat of his chest. She trusted him. That was enough. Jonas stepped up, cleared his throat, and adjusted the mic. "This isn't polished," he said, half laughing. "I'm not a singer. I'm just a dad. And someone gave me this melody once when I didn't know what else to hold on to. I guess tonight I just want to give it back." He glanced toward Celeste. Her eyes met his. No fear, only stillness. He began to hum. The room hushed immediately. Then the first words came, quiet, wavering, but real. "Sleep, my little one. The stars are near. Safe you are when love is here. Though the night may whisper low, my arms will never let you go." Jonas had sung it to Maddie a dozen times, but never like this. Never with his heart laid so bare. He closed his eyes on the last note. Silence. Then a single voice joined him. Feminine, steady, familiar. "Though the road is long and wide, I will be right by your side." Gasps rippled gently through the room. Celeste. She stepped forward, still holding her mug, her voice carrying years of sorrow and strength in equal measure. The room leaned in, breath held. She sang the second verse like a prayer. And Jonas sang with her. Two voices, different but intertwined. Not perfectly, not professionally, but beautifully. When they finished, no one moved for several moments. Then came the sound of applause, soft, then rising. Not loud with noise, but full with gratitude, for the music, for the courage, for the reminder that broken things could still make something whole. Jonas stepped down, heart pounding. Maddie cooed softly against his chest. Celeste met him near the back of the room. "Wasn't planning that," she said. "Me neither." They stood for a moment, the hum of celebration still warm around them. "You remembered the words," he said. She looked down, eyes glossy. "I never forgot. I just buried them for a while." Jonas reached out and took her free hand. "Thank you," he whispered. She squeezed back. "Thank you for giving it back to me." Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft, silent, sacred. Inside, something new had been born, not in a manger, not in a song, but in the simple miracle of two voices, once silenced by loss, learning how to sing again. The snow had stopped by morning, but the sky remained a dull silver, like a question waiting to be answered. Jonas stood in the hallway outside the nursery, watching Celeste from a distance. She was sitting in the rocking chair, holding Maddie against her chest, humming the same lullaby they had sung together on Christmas Eve. She looked peaceful, but Jonas had begun to recognize the signs. The stillness, the way her eyes drifted, as if reading words only she could see. Her silences weren't absence anymore. They were returnings, journeys inward to the places she'd once sworn never to revisit. He wanted to go to her, but something in her posture said, "Not yet." So he waited. Later that afternoon, he was helping Glenn fix a broken pipe in the laundry room when the phone rang. It wasn't his business, but Glenn handed him the wrench and walked into the next room to answer. Jonas tried not to listen, but Glenn's voice lowered, and then stopped altogether. When Glenn returned, his face had changed. "Everything okay?" Jonas asked. Glenn hesitated. That was the foundation board. Jonas set the wrench down. "About what?" "They're asking Celeste to return to New York." Jonas blinked. "For how long?" "They want her back for good." The words landed like a rock to the ribs. He tried to laugh it off. She'd never leave this place. "She might have to," Glenn said quietly. "The board believes her presence here was a sabbatical, not a surrender." Jonas leaned against the wall, pulse kicking. "Do they know what this place is? What she built?" "They know," Glenn said, "but they don't feel it like we do." He found her that evening in the greenhouse. Alone, gloves tossed aside, fingers buried in soil like it was the only thing that could keep her from floating away. She didn't look up when he entered. "I heard," he said. "I figured you would," she replied. Jonas stepped closer. "What are you going to do?" She sighed. "I don't know. I haven't answered their call." He hesitated. "Are you thinking about going?" Her fingers stilled in the dirt. "I spent 8 years running this foundation from the shadows," she said. "Funding things, approving grants, signing letters. But I haven't shown my face in the boardroom since Theo died. They were patient. Until now." "You don't owe them anything," Jonas said gently. "I owe it to myself," she replied, "to find out if I can be that woman again." Jonas tried to breathe evenly. "And if you can." Celeste finally looked up. "Then I'll have to choose." The words cut deeper than he expected. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand." "I'm not leaving yet," she said, reading him instantly. "But I need time." Jonas nodded again. "Of course, take what you need." She moved toward him then, placing a hand lightly on his chest. "This," she whispered, "what we're building, it matters to me." "Then why does it feel like you're already packing your bags?" he said, before he could stop himself. She flinched just slightly. And in that flicker he saw it, the fear, not of him, but of belonging. "I'm not running, Jonas," she said. "Then don't make me feel like I'm something you have to walk away from just to prove you're strong again." Silence fell between them, the kind that wasn't cruel, just unbearably honest. "I'm sorry," he added, softer this time. It's hard to feel this and not know what it means to you." Celeste stepped back. "It means everything. That's what scares me." He nodded, eyes on the ground. "Then maybe we both need to figure out who we are when we're not afraid." She didn't reply, but when he turned to leave, she whispered, "You're not something I walk away from. You're someone I'll have to choose with my whole heart, and I'm not ready to get that wrong." Jonas paused, hand on the greenhouse door. "Then I'll wait," he said. "But not forever." When he stepped outside, snow began to fall again, soft, slow, quiet, like it always did when something important was about to change. The train station in Silverwood was small, only one platform, a single wooden bench, and a faded Coca-Cola machine that had probably outlived 3 generations of ticket agents. Jonas had never been there before. But that morning, as the wind scattered dead pine needles across the tracks, he stood under the overhang with Maddie in her carrier and a letter in his pocket. He hadn't planned to be here. Not until he found Celeste's room empty, her scarf folded neatly on the rocker, and her suitcase gone. No goodbye, no note, just a silence too final to ignore. Glenn had been the one to hand him the envelope, his expression unreadable. "She asked me to give you this," he'd said, "when you were ready." Jonas hadn't opened it. Not yet. Instead, he followed the ache in his chest all the way to the station, where the 9:14 to New York was due to arrive in under 15 minutes. He didn't know what he expected. To find her still on the platform? To catch her before she left? To say everything he couldn't say the night she said she needed time? But there was no one there, only snow and wind and the low murmur of an approaching train. Maddie stirred, letting out a small whimper. Jonas kissed the top of her head and whispered, "I know, baby girl, I know." He sat on the bench and finally pulled the letter from his coat. "Jonas, if you're reading this, then I wasn't brave enough to say goodbye in person. Maybe that says more about me than I want to admit, but I also know you understand silence in a way few people do, because you've lived it too. I'm going to New York. Not because I'm leaving you, but because I need to know if I can face the woman I used to be without falling apart again. I need to know if I can carry Theo's name into the world without it breaking me in half. You once said you wanted to be better. So do I. But I need to do that honestly, without hiding in gardens and lullabies no matter how beautiful they are. This doesn't mean I'm choosing a life without you. It just means I'm learning how to live with all the parts of me before I ask someone to share them. I'm scared, Jonas. Not of loving you, but of not loving you the way you deserve. And I won't come back until I know I can. If you're still there when I do, then maybe we'll get our second chance. The one we never thought we'd deserve." Celeste Jonas closed his eyes. He didn't cry. Not then. The ache was quieter than that. Deeper. Like the way the cold sits inside your bones long after you've come in from the snow. The train arrived, brakes hissing against steel. Doors opened, then closed again. No one got off. No one got on. He watched it disappear into the distance, taking with it something he couldn't name. The days that followed blurred into each other like watercolors in the rain. Jonas kept busy. He had to. Fixing shutters, repairing a broken step, helping Glenn with a new intake of fathers arriving just after the holidays. He smiled when spoken to, nodded when thanked, but his mind was always half somewhere else, between a folded scarf on an empty chair and a voice that once sang just to calm his baby girl. Maddie didn't notice the difference. Or maybe she did, in her own way. She cried a little more, slept a little less, like she missed something she couldn't yet name. One night, while rocking her to sleep, Jonas whispered, "She said she'd come back." And even as he said it, he knew. The waiting was a choice, not a promise. A week later, he stood in the garden, sunflowers still dormant, the air still cold, but with a hint of spring trying to return. He held a spade in one hand, unsure why he came. Then he saw it. A small packet, buried just under the bench, the edge of its envelope poking through the thawing soil. He pulled it out, brushed off the dirt, and opened it. Inside was a single photograph, faded, edges curled. It was Theo, smiling, hands stained with paint, standing beside a tiny garden bed labeled Theo's Light. On the back, in Celeste's handwriting, "Let it bloom again." Jonas closed his eyes, and this time he let the tears come. Not for what he'd lost, but for what he still believed might return. Spring came slowly in Silverwood. The snow didn't melt all at once. It retreated, inch by inch, reluctantly, as though the ground itself wasn't ready to trust again. But still, it came. Birdsong returned. The trees began to bud, shy and stubborn, and the garden behind the Phoenix house, once brittle and brown, began to hum with the quiet promise of green. Jonas was out there every morning now. Not because he was waiting for her, not anymore. He came because the soil asked for him, because the silence no longer felt empty, it felt sacred, and because somewhere along the way he had stopped counting the days since she left. Maddie, now 6 months old, sat in her carrier beside him, chewing on a wooden ring toy and babbling to the worms. She was growing fast, chubbier, louder, endlessly curious. Every time she smiled, it was a reminder. Life doesn't pause for grief. It pushes through it. That morning, he knelt near the bench where he'd once found the photo of Theo. The corner of the frame was now protected beneath a sheet of glass, and above it, he had planted 3 new sunflower stalks. They were barely seedlings now, but they'd come back, just like he had. "Morning, sunshine," Glenn called, stepping into the garden with 2 cups of coffee. Jonas stood and wiped his hands on his jeans. "You're up early." "I'm old, it's what we do." He handed Jonas a cup and gestured toward the soil. "They look good." "They'll bloom by July," Jonas said. "If I don't mess it up." "You won't," Glenn said. "You know how to tend things now." Jonas smiled, but something in the way Glenn looked at him made him pause. "What?" he asked. Glenn took a slow sip. She called. The world tilted just slightly, the kind of shift you feel in your chest before your mind catches up. "Celeste?" Jonas asked, trying to keep his voice level. Glenn nodded. "Last night?" "And?" "She's on her way back." Jonas sat down slowly, the bench cool beneath him. "She didn't say when she'd arrive," Glenn added, "only that she's not coming as the woman who left. She's coming as the one who finally chose." Jonas didn't reply. He looked out over the garden, over the small sprouts, over the sky just beginning to warm. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel weight pressing against his ribs. He felt breath. She arrived 3 days later. Quietly, just as she'd left. Jonas had been mending a broken trellis near the front porch when he looked up and saw the car pull in. Celeste stepped out, wearing a soft gray coat, her hair loose for the first time. She didn't wear her scarf, not over her head, not around her shoulders. She didn't need it anymore. She looked different. Stronger. Softer, somehow. like someone who had finally put down the bag she'd been carrying for years. Jonas didn't move at first, neither did she. Then Maddie, seated in her stroller nearby, squealed. That broke the silence. Celeste laughed. Not politely, not cautiously, but fully, freely. Jonas stepped forward. She met him halfway. They didn't hug, not yet, but their eyes did. "I almost stopped breathing when Glenn told me," he said quietly. "I almost turned around twice on the drive," she replied. "What changed your mind?" She looked at Maddie. "She did. And you." Jonas let the silence settle. "I didn't come back because I was lost without you," Celeste said. "I came back because I found the part of me that could love again." Jonas swallowed, eyes burning. "And are you sure?" She reached out finally and took his hand. "I'm sure of you." This time, he didn't hesitate. He pulled her in, slowly, gently, and wrapped his arms around her. No fear, no weight, just warmth. "Eoga," Maddie cooed. Jonas looked down. "I think she approves." Celeste laughed again. "Good, because I brought her something." She opened her bag and pulled out a small music box, painted navy blue with tiny golden stars. She wound the key and the same lullaby drifted into the air, soft, familiar, whole. Maddie blinked, then smiled. "She remembered it," Jonas whispered. "So did I," Celeste said. "It never really left." They stood there, holding each other in the quiet, while the music box played its final notes. It wasn't a grand reunion. It wasn't fireworks. It was better. It was real. And sometimes real is the most miraculous kind of return. The sunflowers bloomed in July. Tall and golden, they turned their faces toward the morning light as if they'd been waiting for it all their lives. Their petals stretched wide, unapologetic in their beauty, unafraid to stand tall. Jonas stood beside them, Maddie perched on his hip, squealing and reaching for the nearest bloom. "She's going to eat it," Celeste said, laughing from the porch. "Character development," Jonas replied. "Last year she was crying on airplanes. This year she's trying to devour half the garden." Celeste came down the steps, her sundress swaying with each stride. No scarf, not even on her shoulders. Her hair fell naturally now, no longer something to hide behind. She wasn't hiding from the world anymore, or from herself. Jonas still remembered the first time she left that scarf behind, quietly, intentionally. He hadn't said anything. He hadn't needed to. Because healing, he'd learned, didn't arrive like thunder. It unfolded gently, like petals in early spring. They walked together through the garden, Maddie chattering in baby speak between them, her fingers brushing every leaf and stem she could reach. "She's going to remember this place," Celeste said. "Because of the sunflowers?" "No," Celeste smiled. "Because it's where she learned that home isn't just a place. It's a feeling." Jonas looked at her, and the truth of it swelled in his chest. "You know," he said, "you're the reason she's sleeping through the night." Celeste raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "That music box. She hears the melody and just melts, like she knows she's safe." They reached the bench, the same one where he once found a photo buried under winter soil. Now it gleamed beneath the summer sun, surrounded by blossoms. A tiny bronze plaque had been added beneath the seat. "For Theo, who taught us how to begin again." Jonas sat down and pulled Maddie into his lap. Celeste joined him, their shoulders touching with easy familiarity, the kind that didn't ask permission anymore. "I think about him a lot," Jonas said softly. "Theo, I never met him, but somehow I feel like I owe him." Celeste's gaze softened. "You don't owe him, but I think he would have liked you." Jonas chuckled. "You mean the grease-stained mechanic with the baby who won't nap?" I mean the man who stayed. The man who didn't run from the quiet. They fell into silence, not the kind that felt unfinished, but the kind that felt like an answered prayer. After a while, Celeste stood. "There's something I want to show you," she said. He followed her back inside the house, Maddie still content in his arms. They entered the old room, the one with Theo's jacket, the drawings, the rocking chair. But something had changed. The air was lighter. The grief was still there, but it no longer pressed against the walls. It lived beside the joy now. On the shelf was a new book, a children's storybook. Jonas picked it up. The Girl and the Garden That Grew Back. He opened the cover. Inside was a hand-drawn illustration of a little girl planting sunflowers with her father, and beside her a woman with a navy scarf folded gently on the bench behind her, illustrated by Celeste Marin. For Maddie Hale. Jonas blinked hard. "You wrote a children's book?" he whispered. Celeste smiled. "I needed to tell the story. Our story. Hers." Jonas turned the pages slowly. There were pictures of the house, the garden, the baby laughing in the dirt. A final image of a woman standing in the sunlight, arms open, no scarf, no shadow, just whole. At the end was one sentence. "Even after winter, something beautiful can still grow." He looked up. Celeste wasn't smiling now. She was just watching him, calm, open, vulnerable in the best way. "I think I'm ready," she said, "for whatever this is. For us." Jonas didn't reply with words. He stepped forward, Maddie between them, and kissed her. Gently, fully, like someone sealing a vow he'd already made in his heart 100 times over. They stood like that for a long time, in the middle of a room once built to hold sorrow, now filled with the sound of a baby's laughter and the smell of sun-warmed paper. Outside, the sunflowers turned toward the light. And so did they. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to know. Where are you listening from? What part of this journey stayed with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story matters here. And if you'd like to hear more stories of hope, kindness, and quiet miracles, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. One simple click, and you'll be part of a growing community that believes sometimes the smallest acts of love can change everything. Thank you truly for spending your time with this story. Until next time, stay kind, stay open, and remember, it's never too late for something beautiful to begin again.